Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Ernie Olima, and in today's video we're going to be covering topic 9 and 10 of AQA A-Level French. This is Cinema, the seventh art form, and Teenagers, the right to vote and political commitment. This video is to assist your revision and is not a substitute for lessons and official textbooks. Before we get into it, please do like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and also check the description of this video because I put links to plenty of resources to help you do your own research. And this research can be linked to any French speaking country, so not just France. Let's get into it. We're going to start off with topic 9, which is Cinema, the seventh art form, or Cinéma, le septième art. There are three subtopics that we're going to explore linked to the topic of cinema. The first is Pourquoi le septième art? Le cinéma, une passion nationale, is the second, and finally, l'évolution du cinéma, les grandes lignes. So the warm-up activity for today is, what words come to mind when you hear the word cinema? So think of different French words. If you're stuck, think about different genres of cinema, any technical terms that you might know in French to do with cinema, and also the cinema experience. How does cinema make you feel? Give some opinions about cinema using different tenses, so make some sentences up, and then we'll get into the video. I've also put some example sentences down here. So the first one is, J'allais au cinéma tous les samedis quand j'étais plus jeune parce que les films pour enfants étaient vraiment bon marché. So I went to the cinema every Saturday when I was younger because children's films were very cheap. And then, on voudrait regarder un film primé aux Oscars ce week-end pour mon anniversaire. So we would like to watch a film, Oscar-winning film, this weekend for my birthday. And then you can see here the verb primer. It's in its past tense form, but the verb primer is to award a prize to. So give the video a pause and think about what words you know linked to cinema and any sentences that you can make up, and we'll get straight into the rest of it. On the screen, I've put some words and phrases that can be useful when looking at the topic of cinema. So give the video a pause and take a look at them. And finally, some more words here. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that I've put 5 words and phrases that can be useful when doing a reading exercise. So in the reading paper, you may come across these words, and they do like to sometimes confuse you. So we have some synonyms for the cinema, essentially. So instead of just saying cinema, le cinéma, they can say le grand écran, which is basically the big screen, les salles obscures, which means movie theaters, le cinoche, which is slang word for cinema. They could use the phrase se faire une toile, which means to go and see a movie, or they may use the word un navet, which is a bad movie and translates literally to a turnip. So this is just some examples. There could, of course, be more, so definitely do a lot of reading around the topic. But if you ever come across these words on the right-hand side during your exam, at least you'll know and you won't get caught out. The first subtopic we're going to look at is Pourquoi le septième art? So why is cinema known as the seventh art? We need to look at the origin of the term first. So who coined the term le septième art? The term was coined by Ricciotto Canudo in 1911. I've put his name on the screen for you to see. He was an Italian film theoretician who recognized cinema as a distinct art form. Cinema is considered as an art because it combines various artistic elements, so visual imagery, sound, music, and narrative. It's a medium through which emotions and stories are conveyed. If cinema is the seventh art, that must mean there are 6 other arts that come before cinema, and these traditionally were architecture, sculpture, painting, music, poetry, and dance. Cinema is a visual and narrative art too. So in cinema, there is a combination of multiple art forms. It combines visual arts through cinematography, combines sound using dialogue, effects, and music, literature through the script or screenplay, and performance through actors' performances. The importance of aesthetics and cinematic language. So the aesthetic choices in terms of camera angles, lighting, and editing are vital. Directors use a unique cinematic language to tell a story without words, relying on visuals and sound. Finally, the role of the director as an artist. So the director, as the author of the film, crafts the vision and tone of the film, guiding all technical and creative aspects. A reflection of society. So, cinema is a witness to its time. Cinema reflects the cultural, political, and social context of its era. Historical events, social movements, and changing societal values are often depicted in films. The influence of cinema on mentalities and culture. Films can shape public perceptions, influence fashion trends, and have a significant impact on cultural attitudes. For example, in France, films such as La Haine, which came out in 1995, or Les Miserables in 2019, engage with social issues and challenge the status quo, making cinema an important medium for social change. If you haven't watched either of these films, La Haine or Les Miserables, I would go and I would recommend them. They are very good films, and look at, like you mentioned before, they look at social issues. So, cinema as an industry as well as an art. So we have auteur cinema, which is essentially films where the director has a personal artistic vision, and we have commercial cinema. This is often focused on mass appeal and box office success. When making a film, you need to balance art and profitability because although it's an art form, it's also a commercial enterprise. So filmmakers have incentives to balance their creative expression with financial success to ensure the film's production and distribution. Festivals and awards recognizing cinema as art. Events like the Cannes Film Festival, the Academy Awards, known as the Oscars, and the César Awards are examples of how cinema is celebrated as an art form through recognition and awards for creativity and excellence in filmmaking. And finally, evolution of cinema as an art. We'll look at this in more detail. Essentially, starting from silent films, moving to sound films, then adding special effects and technological advancements, and reaching independent cinema and new platforms, so Netflix and streaming. We'll have a look at the evolution of cinema in a few slides. Le cinéma, une passion nationale. So, cinema is arguably a national passion in France due to the history, culture, and role of cinema in everyday life. So, cinema was actually born in France with the Lumiere brothers in 1895. We'll have a look at this on the next slide. In the 1950s and 60s, the Nouvelle Vague, or the New Wave movement, revolutionized cinema, influencing filmmakers worldwide. Today, French people continue to value cinema highly. The government supports the film industry with funding, and French cinemas show a mix of mainstream and independent films. Festivals like the Cannes Film Festival are world famous, and many people have cinema subscriptions too, making movies a big part of their daily lives. Now, looking at the screen, we have on the right hand side a picture of the Cannes Film Festival, and on the left hand side, we have a picture of La Fête du Cinéma. So, this is essentially a an annual festival, and it's over a couple of days in summer in France, usually June and July. It's an occasion to discover films which should be less publicized, and also many independent films are shown at cinemas. Cinema tickets are also taken down to a reduced price. So this basically encourages many people to go to the cinema, use cinema facilities, and also view films that may not have as much support otherwise. We're going to have a look now at the evolution of cinema. The beginnings of cinema. Les premiers films et les inventeurs. Cinema began in the late 19th century with inventors like Thomas Edison and les frères Lumière contributing to its development. Le premier film projeté publiquement was La sortie de l'usine Lumière in 1895, and this film is considered one of the first motion pictures. Le cinéma muet. Early films were silent and relied heavily on visual storytelling. Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and Georges Méliès were key figures in this era. L'arrivée du cinéma parlant, the arrival of sound cinema. So, le passage au cinéma sonore, the transition from silent films to talkies, or films with synchronized sound, started in the late 1920s, with The Jazz Singer in 1927 being one of the first feature-length films with synchronized dialogue. Révolution artistique et technique. This marked a huge shift in storytelling techniques, giving films a new dimension with the addition of voice acting, sound effects, and music. L'âge d'or d'Hollywood, the golden age of Hollywood. Les studios d'Hollywood et l'influence mondiale. Between the 1930s and 50s, Hollywood dominated world cinema, producing big budget blockbusters, musicals, and epic dramas. Les grands réalisateurs et acteurs. Directors like Alfred Hitchcock, Frank Capra, and Orson Welles emerged during this period, and iconic actors like Humphrey Bogart, Audrey Hepburn, and James Stewart defined this era of filmmaking. La Nouvelle Vague est le cinéma français, the French New Wave in French cinema, starting off with La Révolution cinématographique des années 50 et 60. In the late 1950s and 60s, the French New Wave, or La Nouvelle Vague, emerged, led by directors like Jean-Luc Godard, François Truffaut, and Agnès Varda. This movement challenged traditional filmmaking with innovative techniques such as jump cuts, handheld cameras, and more realistic portrayals of life. Cinéma d'auteur, this period emphasized the director's vision as the author of the film, contributing to the idea of cinema as an art form. The expansion of special effects. From the 1970s onwards, the development of special effects revolutionized cinema, with films like Star Wars pushing boundaries of visual effects and creating new opportunities for filmmakers. Computer-generated imagery, CGI, became a key tool in filmmaking, allowing for realistic creatures, settings, and action sequences that were previously unimaginable. Films like Avatar showed the increasing use of 3D and of CGI. Moving to the 2000s, we have a look at digital cinema. So digital filmmaking, so using digital cameras, editing, and projection, began replacing traditional film stock, reducing costs and enabling more independent filmmakers to produce movies. It had a large impact on production and distribution of films. So streaming platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime were able to grow and change the way audiences consume films. Le cinéma d'aujourd'hui, modern cinema, we can see the influence of streaming platforms and digital platforms. As these have greatly influenced modern cinema, audiences now have access to films via streaming, and the film industry is increasingly producing content tailored for online viewing. New technologies such as virtual reality and 3D are pushing the boundaries of how films are experienced, offering immersive environments and interactive storytelling. And finally, we can have a quick think about what the future of cinema could be like, especially with the growth of technological advances like AI. These are being incorporated into filmmaking processes from script writing to editing. And also, it's not just how cinemas are made, but also the experience of cinemas. So there may be greater immersive experiences where audiences can participate actively in films. So breaking down traditional barriers between between the audience and storytelling. Other French-speaking countries. So cinema is not just limited to France, of course. So in the description of this video, I've put some links if you like to do your own research on cinema in Canada, especially Quebec, and also cinema in Africa. On the screen, I've put some stats linked to cinema, so please give the video a pause. If you want to see more stats and surveys linked to cinema and France that are new, as of this video, please check the description. I have links on down there. So we can see here the number of cinema entries has increased and also the revenue. France cinemas lead the way in post-COVID recovery, especially at rebounding stronger than most other countries in terms of audience figures, but it's still not back to pre-COVID levels. And finally, 54% of French people se rendent allant au cinéma, so that's another way of saying they go to the cinema, 3 fois plus par an, préférant les comédies, films d'action, et enfin les thrillers. So again, this is just a small snippet from a study which I've linked in the description, so definitely have a look at that. If you have spare time, please go and watch some French films. It's definitely good to have something to talk about because you may be asked in a speaking exam, have you ever watched a French film? I can't guarantee it, but if you have, that would definitely be useful. Now, most people are probably studying a film anyway for their their writing paper, but it's also nice to have something else to show that you know the topic in more detail. And then when you're talking about the film, you can also talk about how the history of French cinema, starting from the Lumiere brothers and etc. How you think cinema will change in the future. That's how you can expand on your answer. But it's always good to show that you're not just that you've done some research, just so the examiner knows. We're going to have a look at some grammar now, and we're going to look at commands. So in French, commands or the imperative mood are used to give orders, advice, instructions, or requests. They exist only in the tu, nu, and vous form and do not use a subject pronoun. So on the screen, give the video a pause and take note of the irregulars and how to use commands in the negatives and with pronouns. Most of this would come naturally already from GCSE and just listening and watching to French and consuming French content. But give the video a pause if you're unsure on commands, and we'll move on to the next topic, which is topic 10, looking at teenagers' the right to vote on the next slide. Topic 10, teenagers, the right to vote and political commitment. Les ados, le droit de vote et l'engagement politique. The three subtopics underneath this topic are pour ou contre le droit de vote, les ados et l'engagement politique, motivé ou démotivé, and quel avenir pour la politique. So again, define any keywords here. In this case, it would probably be l'engagement politique. So what is l'engagement politique? How do people participate in politics? And also thinking about trying to answer these questions. So what future does politics have? And also looking at the right to vote. Just if you have any ideas, give the video a pause and think about it. If not, we'll go straight into the content and vocab. On the screen, I've put some words, so give the video a pause. Also take note for la démocratie. Although we say it the same in a similar way to English, democracy and la démocratie is spelt with a T instead of a C. So it's spelt Democratie. There's not a second C in la démocratie. It has a T instead. And another word that can sometimes be confusing is la majorité. So you might think that's just majority, but it may be talking about the age of majority, l'âge de la majorité, which is essentially being older than 18 in France, basically being an adult in legal terms. A few more words on this slide, so give the video a pause and take note. Pour ou contre le droit de vote. So when you're thinking about this topic of being for and against the right to vote, so here are some real life examples. I've put the links in the description to the articles that they are linked to. So the first one is talking about the right to vote of women in France, and then the second one is about how in the 2022 presidential election there was a large participation of prisoners. So when talking about the right to vote, it's not just citizens who are regular citizens, it also includes prisoners and other members of society who may be marginalized. Finally, as of this video, the voting age in Cameroon is actually age 20. So Cameroon being a francophone country, the voting age there is 20 compared to France, which is 18, which is another fact that you can have. Les ados et l'engagement politique, motivé ou démotivé. So low voter turnout among young people. Many young people in France and across the world actually do not vote, especially in local and European elections. Some reasons for this could be lack of interest, feeling that their vote won't change anything, distrust in politicians sometimes. There are now alternative forms of political engagement which are equally important. So even though they may not vote, teenagers and young people engage in other ways, including protests, petitions, social media, and other forms of activism. The role of education in political awareness. So French schools teach éducation civique to inform students about democracy, elections, and their rights. However, some argue that it's not enough to truly motivate young people to get involved. The impact of social media on political engagement. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, or X, Instagram, and TikTok, allow young people to express political opinions and mobilize quickly. However, there are some risks, including misinformation and superficial engagement. Possible solutions to increase youth political participation. So we could lower the voting age to 16 to encourage early political habits. We can make politics more accessible and transparent for young people by having simpler language or maybe more direct engagement from politicians. On the slide, you can see two articles that I've put links to in the description of this video. The first one is Les jeunes français portent-ils un regard différent sur la politique et la société? And the next one is why more French youth are voting for the far right. Again, both of these articles are in relation to young people in France and politics. So have a look at those if you'd like to have some more information and more ideas. Finally, quel avenir pour la politique? So, the rise of populism and extreme parties. In France, the Rassemblement National, which is a far right party, and La France Insoumise, which is a far left party, are gaining ground in recent years. This rise reflects growing discontent with traditional parties and the rejection of elitist politics. In other French speaking countries, such as Belgium and Switzerland, political polarization is also increasing. The impact of globalization on local politics. So, local politics is increasingly influenced by global issues such as climate change, the economy, and migration. In France, this is reflected in the rise of green parties and pro European movements. Other French speaking countries, such as Canada, also face tensions between globalization and local politics, especially with America and Donald Trump. The growing role of new technologies and social media. Social media plays a major role in modern politics, influencing election campaigns, public debates, and political mobilization. However, these platforms can also be fertile ground for misinformation and opinion manipulation. In France, recent elections have shown an increased use of social media by parties and candidates. Political and electoral system reforms. There are more and more voices calling for reform of the French electoral system, particularly to introduce more proportional representation, which would better reflect the diversity of political parties. Challenges related to youth political engagement. So, as we've seen before, politics struggles to generate interest amongst the younger people, who are often seen as less engaged than previous generations. However, young people are very active in social movements, which could influence the future of politics. Political parties may need to adapt to the expectations of these new generations, which are more concerned with social and environmental issues. Politics is a very broad subject, so when you're talking about French politics or Francophone politics, there are many things that you can talk about, not just the things we've mentioned. So I'd recommend reading around the subject just to see if there's anything that interests you. Look at the recent elections in France and other French speaking countries. So on the screen, I've put some things that we didn't talk about, including the EU. So I put the EU flag there. And quick quiz. So, what do all of these flags in the bottom left hand side of the screen have in common? So, all of these flags are Francophone African countries that have had some form of military coup or political instability in the last 5 years. So, as of this video. And the reason I put it on there is because having any military coup or instability like that would impact the right to vote. In some cases, we've had elections being suspended or postponed, sometimes votes nullified, and reports of that. So, when you're talking about the right to vote, you could also mention that in other countries, due to political instability, it's not the same as in European French speaking countries. Finally, if you're interested in Francophone Africa, it's a good subject to talk about for your IRP. There are many things that you can talk about there, so I'd have a look at that too. The final bit of grammar for this video will be negatives. When learning negatives, you'll know most of them by now, but learn how to use them with other constructions such as indirect object pronouns and direct object pronouns, and also using en and e with negatives just to make your speaking more fluent and also when you're writing. So ne pas, ne jamais, ne rien, ne personne, ne plus, ne ni, ne que sometimes forgotten, ne aucun. On this side we have some more rare negatives. You may come across these in your reading paper, so you're not expected to use all of these, but sometimes you may come across it, especially when you're reading an old text. So definitely have a look to see if there are any of these that you don't recognize, like ne guère or ne nulle part, things like that. They could come up, so it's nice to have an awareness of those beforehand. We have now reached the end of the video, so thank you for watching. Please check the description to see all of the resources I put down there, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you at the next video, which will be the final one of this series.